Welcome to this session of Keeping It Real with John Walsh. This is Adi Mopidevi. Thanks for being on the show. Really excited to bring John to our audience and learn the fantastic insights what John has got for us. John, welcome to Keeping It Real show.
Thanks, Adi. Good to be with you.
Thank you. John, would you actually introduce yourself to our community and our active listeners?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks again, Adi. So, John Walsh, longtime IT leader in pharmaceuticals and life sciences. I've had the pleasure to work at some of the world's great companies. Wyeth started as a lowly developer back when we were developers before we were coders. Now Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Mars, Teva, most recently Otsuka Pharmaceuticals. Somewhere in the middle of that, actually after Wyeth, I started a digital marketing agency in New York, where we worked with pharmaceutical companies and brands to figure out how to use this new thing called the internet to connect with patients and prescribers. When I was at Mars, I created a new group internally that did all the digital work around the world. So we had 1,500 websites, 1.5 billion page views. We sold $400 million worth of stuff online, including little custom printed M&Ms if you ever had one of those. You use my technology, yeah. Launched 7 of those across Europe. Took over the one in the US eventually. So I started in IT, but as I just said, went over to the agency side, but more specifically the digital marketing side, and had senior digital marketing roles at GSK, Consumer Healthcare, and then Mars, and then made a conscious decision to get back into IT leadership.
Okay.
From a career-wise perspective, I was more differentiated as an IT leader who understood digital, consumer, customer engagement, and marketing than as a digital marketer. No one was going to make me the next vice president of marketing. So it was a great career move for me and felt very natural in bringing back that understanding of not just the technology, but how it's used to do the business. I found very helpful in my IT leadership roles.
It's a pleasure to have you, John, especially when you spoke about those custom printed M&Ms. I'm like, that is cool. I've only seen them in pictures, maybe. I've never even seen them for real.
Yeah.
But having said that, when you spoke about selling first time on internet, in your career, you would have witnessed quite a few transformations in the technology, like probably the rise of internet, mobile, cloud, and now we are talking about AI, or probably in the last couple of years. So, as a senior leader, what are the common trends and patterns you've actually observed on how businesses adapt and integrate to these significant technology changes?
Yeah, great question. With new technology, you always have the early adopters. They're moving very fast, sometimes in a frenetic way, maybe not focused on solving a problem. And sometimes that sort of general, I would say, innovation, but just energy can be very helpful to break new barriers and go forward. Though I love the way you framed the question. It's what was true for digital and mobile web-based stuff, and then getting over to analytics and now a large language model AI, or even just more structured AI behind it. The initial energy over the whole thing sometimes leads to what Gartner calls the valley of despair, right? And all the excitement, then it comes crashing down. But I think a way to moderate that is to be focused on what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? If you're speaking with someone and you find them talking about a technology or an innovation, the shiny pebble syndrome, right? I've got this new shiny boy, we're just going to use that. How can we use AI to improve our XYZ process? Interesting question, but spend time getting to the use case as opposed to just throwing things at the wall. So I think the discipline of being focused on a problem you're trying to solve is very helpful. And frequently that will lead you to, oh, we thought we could contribute, reduce these costs, accelerate this process using AI, using mobile, using Internet of Things, pick the technology of the day. You'll find sometimes you're on, sometimes you're off. But if you focus on that problem and reimagine how you achieve that end, you generally add some value, right? And eventually you might get around to using that technology. But it shouldn't be about utilizing the Internet of Things or using mobile or using AI. It should be about solving a problem. And you start, similar to generalized AI, you start with a hypothesis. You don't start with a conclusion. You start with,
Mhm.
I think this
Yes.
will work this way.
Yeah.
And then you get into it and you prove whether you're right or you're wrong. It's really okay to be wrong. It's just use course correct and
Mhm.
keep going towards the end.
There's a lot of wisdom in what you just spoke. Would you like to share with us what's one of your favorite transformation initiatives you've led and which you're like really proud of in your career?
Yeah. So actually, I'll share one very recently from my time at Otska. Like many other pharmaceutical companies, the way they go to market, they have field sales forces. You have territory representatives reporting to district managers, reporting to regional managers into the head of a given therapeutic area
Mhm.
sales force. At Otska, it would be CNS or neurology or nephrology, or Merck would be oncology. What has happened as healthcare and the payor structure has shifted in the United States, and some of it's just geographical as well. Medicine is practiced differently in New Mexico than it is in
Mhm.
Maine, right?
Yes.
Different in Florida than it is in Michigan.
Mhm.
So there's a regionalization of this, and payers have their hand in it for sure, and the IDNs and these large
Yes.
healthcare networks. But yet, companies were going to market with the same national visual aid and
Okay.
similar promotional activities that were just going to go out across the United States.
Yeah.
And that didn't really make sense. Now, some companies have been making that shift. So what Otska did is they were going to transform the business. There was a very small number of us involved in this planning initially because it was going to affect jobs and people were going to have to interview for jobs and all that in
Mhm.
the planning. So how are we going to change this to deal with that regionalization and create these ecosystems where you just didn't have sales in a given geographic territory? You had the medical science liaisons, the MSLs, you had
Mhm.
payer market access people in there, you
Mhm.
had the patient support people in there, and all those resources could be pulled together to deal with the healthcare community in a given region. So it's a
Mhm.
bit innovative. Again, some other companies have done it. We weren't the first ones to do it, but that was a business transformation. Now, I know I haven't talked technology yet,
Yes,
but
I
if you're
understand what you
right
mean.
now
Uh-huh.
planning on how you go to market for how you size a sales force, how you do territory alignment. So this is what doctors are going to be called and by what reps. And if I'm a rep, what doctor do I have in my healthcare area and institutions? You're going to do call planning. How are you going to call and connect with all these people? You're going to have other promotional activity around that, from dinner meetings and lunch meetings and
Mhm.
symposia, et cetera. And you got email campaigns and all this. How are you going to restructure that to be more of an ecosystem region-based
Yes.
program than these national kind of cookie cutter things? It involved radical transformation of all the technology
Mhm.
and the analytics, the incentive compensation bonus plan for the field. And so one is we were involved early, right, and could
Mhm.
influence it and, say, well, hey, don't do that way. That's going to be really, difficult to do, or that's going to have an unexpected outcome. So we were at the table. So that was very good. Then two is we brought in more IT people before some of the other areas because we had to really get ahead of a lot of this work. And then there was an awful lot of agile thinking going through this. There was some course correcting as they were figuring out how to do all this and how all these processes would move forward. So it wasn't the technology limiting it, but it was we had to dance to some of those tunes. One of the greatest compliments I've ever been paid in my professional life was when our chief commercial officer came to me at the end of that and
Mhm.
said, 2 years ago, before you got here, we wouldn't have been able to do this
Mhm.
because of the technology group and the technology that was in practice. It just would not have supported this. But
Yeah.
we're able to do it because of what you guys did. And I just sort of thought that was fabulous. The fact that we had built a more modern tech stack supporting the commercial enterprise, recruited a world-class team,
Yeah.
but then more importantly, really engage with the business. We're
Yep.
involved early and able to influence decisions and
Mhm.
indeed lead a lot of it. So as we got to market, the things worked.
Yeah. It's fantastic to hear that, especially from a commercial officer or a chief financial officer to come
Yeah.
up to an IT head and say, hey, you know what? I really like what you did. It's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that story.
Mm.
When I went through your profile, very interesting for me is how you transitioned your role, which you already spoke about in your introduction, from like a technical IT role to leading a digital marketing effort. How did this experience shape your perspective on technology and business alignment? What are the key things you've learned in this transition and coming back to technology job?
Yeah. So from an individual and business partnership role. I don't care if you're the CIO or
Yep.
down further in the organization.
Yes.
There's some level of business partnership and business analysis you're going to be responsible for. Now, at my
Yes.
level, I was communicating with the executive team.
Yes.
Down, we actually had people who had bespoke roles of business partnership, and they would engage and they would bring in business analysts to define needs and all that. I found that having that sort of experience on the agency side, but also I had a dotted line in the chief marketing officer in both Mars and GSK.
Hmm.
Having that experience and being at those tables as marketing strategies are being developed and promotional programs are being thought and rethought through and agencies are being hired and sales forces are being deployed gave me greater insight to what levers existed, how those levers were pulled and shifted, and what questions to ask. One
Yes.
of the things I have found to be true in my career is that frequently business leaders will think something is really hard technologically and we'll never get there, or they won't understand how technology can help them do some things,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And sometimes what they think is hard is easy. Now, on
Yes.
the flip side of it is also true. Sometimes, oh, the IT guys will just drop a quarter in the computer and it'll go out and spit that off. Go, actually, that's really hard because of the way we structured the data, or because of the
Right.
partners we're using, and because of the technology we're using, or the mobile devices that are
Hmm.
deployed. They'll miss some things that are more difficult, and that would add new information to the equation. It's not we can't do it because of technology, but in order to do that, we need to replace all the laptops in the field, or we need to deploy iPads, or we
Yep.
need to swap out whatever technology we're using, hardware or software, to do something. And that just is an added dimension.
Yep.
So I think from a personal, professional perspective, understanding how commercial works has been very helpful to contribute to those conversations. Then further, it's been helpful in recruiting people and managing teams
Wow.
uh, to help keep them focused. As I started at the beginning of this conversation, it's about solving a problem. I just had this conversation with a company the other day. I was looking for some advice, and they sent me some lists. And one of their top little IT tactical priorities was to
Hmm.
deploy Adobe. I think it was Adobe 15 on it. I don't know what version it was, but to deploy Adobe to all the PCs in the company.
Okay.
And I thought, that is such a stupid objective. What is the problem they're trying to solve? Now, they think that's
Yes.
the solution. Very well might be.
Yep.
But if they deploy that is, well, then everyone's got to sign in, or is it single sign? And what about the instructions? How do they use it? Do they tell that don't use the browser version of PDF? What's all the change management wrapped around that?
Hmm.
And you don't get to those parts of the answer unless you first step back and say, we're trying to allow our employees to seamlessly access FDA documents on their computer and save them in PDF or whatever the business problem is.
Yes.
And then you have all that, what I just said, wrapped into that. But instead, they write on a bulleted list, deploy Adobe 15 to PCs. And they may miss solving the problem they're trying to solve. They've achieved the
Exactly.
technical end.
Absolutely.
And so back to your question, if as an IT leader, I'm looking at my people saying deploy Adobe 15 or whatever it is, that's not the right tactic. That's not the right project. It's
Hmm.
solve the problem and then almost more importantly, have the measure to know when you've succeeded.
Yep.
Right. So when it's in and these things are happening and the calls to the service desk have dropped by 50%, or we're not emailing documents anymore, we're collaborating on them, whatever the measure is, have a measure around everything you're trying to do to know that you've succeeded and then continue to try and improve upon it.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, hey, I understand what you're asking me to do, but what is the problem you're really trying to solve? And in my experience as well, when you actually overlap your experience with business and technology, the kind of questions you ask are significantly different. It's more reading the same book with more wisdom. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, what you understand is, oh no, actually, I thought it was this. It's actually something else altogether. Thank you for
Yeah.
that answer.
What I jokingly say all the time is, yes, can we come talk about that? I have a whole bunch of annoying questions I'm going to ask you. And because sometimes they are.
Yes,
All the
yes,
business wants you to do is pound table, deploy this technology, pound
absolutely.
table, give access to our data warehouse to this vendor, pound table, the proverbial, I read it in the airplane magazine, go get me one of these.
Uh-huh.
And then when you come in and you start saying, so what problem are you trying to solve? How are
Yes.
we doing that today?
Yep.
What does best practice look like? What measures do we have around this? Those are challenging questions sometimes to someone who just wants to pound table. I told you, go do this thing. Uh,
Yes.
so that therein comes a little bit of the art form, I think, of business partnership
Hmm.
within any company, but I'm very within life sciences, is to work with the business to help them gain greater insight to what they're trying to achieve, how they're trying to measure it, how they're trying to improve it. And you frequently end up back in the same place, which is fine, let's go deploy Adobe 15, right?
Yeah.
But you're going to wrap other pieces around that to
Yes.
make sure that you're actually solving the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So, having spoken about this, and with the advent of AI right now, there is always a fresh inclination towards bringing up innovation. But if you consider the industries like pharma, I'm sure FMCG is regulated too, especially in the food sector, right?
Sure.
What are some key considerations for businesses aiming to thrive and grow and deploy innovation in these industries? And what advice would you have for these leaders for leading
Yeah,
these?
I would say there's books and written on innovation. There's libraries full of innovation.
Yes.
Their entire college majors set up around innovation, and there's real science to how you do that. And I think saying it is one thing, bringing in some discipline of how we're going to drive innovation,
Hmm.
um, and how we're going to invest in it, and then limit investment. And actually, I think that tail end is actually almost more important than the first, which is if you got 10 potential projects going forward to try and drive some innovation. The basic stuff I've been saying, they all need to be focused on a business problem, right?
Hmm.
And need to have milestones. And when something gets to a milestone and say, we really thought this would be a better way to identify potential market leaders to do X, Y, Z,
Yeah.
and not working. The secret is you've got to kill those. And that allows more focus and more energy on the ones that maybe have a chance of scaling up. That's what makes capitalism work. It's not the freedom to invest, it's the freedom of failed business ideas to fail and fail fastly and capital get reallocated.
Hmm.
And that kind of just gets lost because it's obvious. But if I tried to grow oranges in Pennsylvania, where I live, I
Hmm.
can grow them 3 months a year. They can grow them 12 months a year in California and Florida. They're going
Yeah.
to beat me every time. So my orange grove is going to fail. And whoever my investors are going to take their money and go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what really makes it all work. And the same thing needs to be true in any innovation program.
Hmm.
You can't fall in love with an idea because then you're going to keep funding it. And my experience, and granted, I'm coming, largely from a pharma background with this, is it's not even the money. I mean, it is the money, but it's not really just the money. It's the management attention,
Hmm.
that we're going to meet every week for a few hours to review all these projects. And are we still talking about that one that can't seem to get out of the blocks? Sometimes those things you have to kill, or you'll get it to a new leader who maybe can solve a problem.
Yes.
So I think with innovation, again, focus on a problem we're trying to solve. Or if it's pure exploratory, we're trying to find a use case for large language model, generative AI.
Hmm.
I don't really like that. I think you need to get to something and what you're trying to do. Then have tests with milestones and targets and be willing to terminate things that don't get off the ground or meet those milestones.
Yeah. And while I hear this, one of the things I'm actually thinking about, like kind of a thought that came to my mind, say if you're a CIO or you're the one who heads the IT, how would you work with your peers, like your other C-level executives, and help them understand how should they really embrace innovation? Because there will be a push from them in asking, hey, what are we doing about this? What should you do about this? And probably sometimes you have to be forerunning as well, and you probably have to expect what they need to do, and how do you actually even keep up with them?
Yeah, well, you just put your finger on it. I think spending time with these folks and helping to understand what their challenges are and contributing to those conversations is just terrifically important. And when you get to the top of the IT organization, I'm going to repeat my knowing their problems, right? Because
Hmm.
they will come at you with asks and direction and go get me's and
Hmm.
do this now. But you've got to get behind that and understand what their problems are and what they're trying to solve. And if every time they restructure the sales force, incentive compensation goes wrong for a quarter of their
Yeah.
field force, that's a disaster, right? And then
Yeah.
they spend weeks trying to correct that. They have unmotivated sales reps. How can you contribute to fixing some of that?
Hmm.
And it's 2024. Almost nothing happens in business today without technology.
Yes.
Almost nothing. And it doesn't mean that IT needs to be involved in everything. Awareness is good. And certainly if you get to some level of corporate data, yeah, you want to be involved in that. Gartner's actually got a really good chart. Does IT need to be involved in the spreadsheet that the intern is creating to look at some sort of projections? No, not
Yeah.
really. But if
Yeah.
that spreadsheet starts to have lots of things added onto it, where it gets to a point where it's actually going to produce a number that ends up in the annual report, then we have a problem, because now
Yeah.
we have something that hasn't really been vetted, tied in, and all that. So
Yes.
there's things cross barriers and they start to get to be more real. You're not going to have the business implement an email
Yes.
system or an ERP system or things like that,
Yep.
but they need the flexibility to be up here experimenting. And I think bringing that discussion into light
Hmm.
is important. And actually, again, lay that out and give these examples so they go, all right, that makes sense. Yeah, you don't have to be involved in everything IT, but I see that when we're going to start to scale this up to use enterprise data. And I think one of the good sides of cyber, right? CISOs are all in the hot in demand right now. None of us are connecting with partners. Or if you're smart, you're not connecting with partners unless you've done some sort of security audit to make sure that your stuff
Yep.
doesn't end up on a server somewhere where you don't want it. Or was it Home Depot where their air conditioning partner, the vendor that they hired for AC, basically brought in a virus and
Oh,
infected
yeah.
the systems?
I,
Home Depot, or there's one of them.
yeah.
Disaster. So the good news is that the business says, oh gosh, there's this new capability from this new vendor, SaaS solution. Boy, just plug them into our data warehouse and let them go off, and it's going to be great. It's like, well, all right,
Yeah.
hold on, time out. Now they have to come through us because they have to get that approved to be able to connect to that sort of thing. And then we start asking all those annoying questions. Where is the data? How is it accessed? How is it secured? And it does give us an opportunity to vet that potential partner, but also start to tick away at some of those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I can totally see how those conversations are going to go. They're going to be very interesting conversations. And no wonder the calendar is busy for all these IT leaders. So, moving on to a little bit more around the future, having with your expertise and your foresight, what are the trends you foresee shaping the future of IT and business, especially with the given technology innovations or technology platform availability? And how can leaders or companies prepare for these changes? What can they do to grow as a leader themselves and for their company as well?
Yeah. So I think it's more important than ever for IT leaders and for business leaders to keep up with what's going on. Look within your industry, but also look outside your industry, right?
Mhm.
I might be in life sciences right now. One of the places life sciences frequently looks at is
Mhm.
CPG. CPG tends to move a bit more quickly, and they're trying to get more consumer intimacy and engagement, right?
Yes.
So how can we take some of those practices and principles and think about how we employ those? I do find be careful how I say this, in pharmaceuticals and life sciences,
Hmm.
sometimes leaders will use oh, that works fine for them, but we're a regulated industry. They'll use some of that as an excuse. Some of it's absolutely true, and we never want to violate regulations. We want to be 100% compliant always, and quality is, job one for sure. Having said that,
Hmm.
we shouldn't apply constraints right up front with the assumption that being a regulated industry should stop us from using the latest laser beam, satellite based, infrared, blockchain thing. So if we have an application for that, let's think about how we use that. Then at the end, say, how do we do that in a compliant way? How do we do it in a way that'll pass
Yes.
audit? And can we identify the weak spots in it? And then even to the point where, hey, can we go talk to whoever the regulatory authority is and say,
Yes.
hey, this solves a problem for patients, for prescribers, but it is definitely bumping up against this portion of this regulation. Is that something we can look at? I mean, these conversations, by the way, happened early on with FDA
Hmm.
around the internet. So this is
Yeah.
right around the time when they're getting into direct to consumer advertising. And I was part of the Pharmaceutical Research Manufacturers Association, put together a group. And we were down in DC meeting with the agency, and agency was soliciting input as they were thinking of passing or documenting whatever guidelines they eventually were going to produce, which was a long time coming. And so there absolutely is, especially with these newer technologies, there is opportunity to work with the regulatory authorities, and certainly on work as an industry as well. Is this is going to solve a big enough of a problem
Mhm.
that let's find a way to make it work and do it in a, compliant way.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, John. You've covered a range of topics, like literally how it was, how you have served the industry, and what's the future for them. But there's one important question I wanted to ask all through looking at your virtual background. What's your handicap?
Oh, my index is around an 11 right now, so I'm still struggling a bit. I need to spend a little more time out in the golf course to get that down, but I can get around a little bit, yeah, for sure.
I've tried to get my head around with golf multiple times. In fact, even now, it requires a lot of patience to get
It's
going
it's a humbling
because
sport.
I remember one of my mentors told me once that every time I go to the golf course, I just come back thinking, I'm not right always. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John. It is wonderful having you on a Keeping It Real show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. And whatever we've spoken, our audience will love to hear through and grab words of wisdom from your vast experience. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you. Good to be
Thank
with
you.
you.